They lived in my house for free, used my money to fund their European vacation, then called me a burden behind my back. So I sold the house. While they were still abroad. My name is Emma Davis, and I used to believe I came from a loving family, not perfect, no but solid, safe, and, most of all, mine. That belief, like so many others I clung to, cracked the day I heard my parents call me a burden. It started with a letter. Not just any letter, a will. My grandmother, Elizabeth Davis, my fierce, independent, maternal figure, and the only person who'd ever made me feel truly seen, had passed away quietly in her sleep. A stroke, they said. She was 81. I had been with her just a week earlier, sipping chamomile tea on the back porch, her gnarled hand resting over mine as she watched the wind sweep through her rose garden. There was a quiet strength in her, the kind of dignity that refused to fade. Even with time. 2 days after the funeral, I was called into her attorney's office. I expected a few keepsakes, maybe her favorite brooch or a stack of photo albums. What I didn't expect was to be handed the deed to her house, a stunning mid-century two-story nestled on a half-acre lot in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in town. She left it to me. I asked, blinking. Entirely, the lawyer confirmed. Free and clear. She even included a note, handwritten. He passed me a thick envelope sealed in wax. My name was written on the front in her delicate cursive, Emma. Inside was a letter, just a single page. My dear girl, if you're reading this, then I've gone on ahead. Please don't mourn too long. I've had a rich life, and no regrets. I'm leaving you my home because I know you'll honor it, care for it, and use it as a foundation, not as a crutch. Never doubt that you deserve every good thing that comes to you. I am so proud of the woman you've become. Love always, Grandma E. B.I. is blurred with tears. The attorney waited respectfully. She didn't leave anything to my parents. I asked slowly. He cleared his throat. She left them a modest sum. But the house and the majority of her assets were left to you. I left the office dazed, clutching the letter and deed like they might vanish if I let go. I drove home to the house I shared with my parents, the very house that was now legally mine. Yes, we all lived there. Grandma had invited my parents to move in after my father lost his job during the 2008 recession. They had never left when she passed. The dynamic didn't shift. I had just inherited the home they treated like their own. That night, I broke the news at dinner. They were cordial, pleasant even. That's wonderful, my mother said, a bit too quickly. Just what your grandmother would have wanted. My father nodded, slicing his steak with deliberate care. Yes, quite the honor. But something in their eyes gave me pause. Not a surprise. Not even disappointment. Calculation. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the new reality of home ownership. I transferred utilities into my name. I started making plans, renovations, maybe renting out the basement apartment for income. It wasn't until a rainy Tuesday evening that I accidentally overheard them. I'd come home early from a showing. My shoes were soaked, and I left them at the door. As I reached the kitchen, I heard their voices drifting from the den. They hadn't heard me come in. She's been a burden from the start, my father was saying. All those years of expenses, tuition, food, and now she thinks she deserves the house. We've lived here longer than she has. My mother responded, her voice clipped. We'll let her settle in. Then we'll talk to her about signing it over, maybe frame it as a trust. She'll listen. She always does. There was a pause, then laughter. Low and smug. I backed away from the door slowly, heart pounding in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. Burden, it echoed louder than the storm outside. I spent the night in my room, silent, replaying the conversation again and again. At first, I told myself I had misunderstood, misheard, but I knew better. It was clear as crystal. My parents didn't view me as family. I was a transaction, a tool, and they were going to take the house. The next morning, I put on my best mask and went to work as usual. Real estate demanded composure. I smiled for clients, advised young couples about interest rates, and staged open houses. But under it all, something had broken loose. I couldn't unhear what I'd heard, and I couldn't stay in that house not without it becoming a cage. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop and labeled it, Exit Plan. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was the composed professional daughter, cheerfully chatting about mortgage trends and new paint colors. By night, I was packing, planning, and disentangling my life. I contacted a moving company, booked a storage unit in my parents' names, paid 6 months in advance. I started browsing temporary rentals, quiet, unfurnished one-bedroom units where I could regroup. And then, one evening, I came across a photo that shattered me. It was buried deep in an old drawer, tucked between curling postcards and birthday cards from years past. Me about 5 years old sitting on my father's shoulders at a county fair, cotton candy in one hand, giggling. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, trying to find the man in it. Trying to reconcile him with the one who had laughed at calling me a burden. I almost called it all off, but then I remembered the letter. My grandmother's words, "You deserve every good thing that comes to you." I placed the photo into a box labeled parents' items and taped it shut. I confided in no one. Not yet. Not until I had moved out. Not until the house was sold. I even kept the listing private, marketed through a trusted colleague, Marcus, who owed me a favor. I told him only that I needed discretion. Within 2 weeks, we had 3 offers, one from a corporate exec relocating from New York. He could close quickly and was offering $915,000, just below asking, but acceptable. I signed the papers that Friday. The house, the one that had been my grandmother's sanctuary, the one I had inherited with love, would no longer be mine. I stood in the garden that evening, the sunset pouring gold over the petals of the roses Elizabeth had planted decades ago. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "but I can't stay." I didn't know then what the fallout would look like, or how far my parents would go once they returned from Europe. But I knew one thing with unwavering clarity: I had to leave, and I had to do it before they returned. I placed a handwritten note on the granite kitchen counter. Facing the entrance it read, "Surprise. A burden did this." Then I locked the front door behind me, dropped the keys through the mail slot and walked away. Without looking back, I didn't sleep the night I left. The hum of adrenaline was louder than the city traffic outside my new apartment window. The place was small, barely 600 square feet, with neutral gray walls, generic art, and a faint chemical scent from recent cleaning, but it was mine. No inherited furniture, no memories soaked into the carpet, just quiet. And for the first time in years, no one asked me where I was going, who I was seeing, or why I spent money on myself. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through a window I hadn't yet hung curtains over. I brewed a bitter cup of black coffee from a machine I barely knew how to use and sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the towers across the man-made pond behind the complex. It felt like I'd just amputated part of my life, and maybe, in some ways, I had. For the next week, I busied myself with logistics. I unpacked essentials, nothing decorative, just tools for function. My laptop, my documents, my grandmother's letter. I set up enhanced email security, changed my phone number, and rerouted all mail to a rented P.O. box in a different zip code. Then I called my office. "Hi, it's Emma. I need to take 2 weeks off. Personal reasons." There was silence on the line for a beat. Then my boss, Vanessa Martinez, said, "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. And then, after a pause, "No, but it will be." Vanessa didn't press. "Take all the time you need." By day I researched new places to live permanently. I wanted distance not just geographically, but psychologically from everything my life had been. By night, I watched television shows I didn't care about and ordered takeout meals I barely tasted. I checked my old voicemail once daily. Nothing yet. My parents were still on vacation, still ignorant of the tectonic shift that had occurred beneath them. And then, 10 days after the house closed, the dam broke. I was slicing an avocado in the kitchen when my phone lit up. Voicemail for New. The first was my father. "Emma, what the hell is going on? We just got home, and our key doesn't work. Call us immediately." The second was more urgent, more enraged. "Emma Marie Davis, this is not funny. Where are you? Why is the house empty? Call us now." The third was my mother's soft, syrupy, fake concern dripping from every word. "Emma, sweetie, we're very worried about you. Please call as soon as you get this. We just want to know you're safe." The final voicemail came around midnight. "We found your note. I don't know what you think you heard, but you've made a terrible mistake. This is our home too. You had no right to sell it. We're consulting an attorney first thing tomorrow. You've done it this time, Emma." I played each one twice. Then I saved them to a secure folder and backed them up to the cloud. The next morning, Marcus, my discreet real estate colleague, texted me, "Your parents are at the office," causing a scene. Jamie tried to calm them, but they're furious. The boss told them you're on leave and asked them to leave. "Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Thank you. Just family drama. I'll explain when I'm back. That afternoon, Vanessa called. Emma, she said gently. Your parents accused you of fraud. Selling a house that wasn't yours? What's going on? I inhaled deeply. The house was mine. My grandmother left it to me. They lived there rent-free for years. I overheard them planning to manipulate me into signing it over. Silence. Did you sell it legally? She asked quietly. Everything was documented. Attorney reviewed every step. Another pause. Then, good. They've been banned from the premises. Take whatever time you need. Her calm acceptance loosened something in my chest. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath. My parents weren't finished. They contacted distant relatives, mutual friends, even my college alumni directory. One of them must have given them my new email address. Because 2 weeks later, I received a 900-word essay titled Family Should Come First. They framed it as a misunderstanding. Claimed I had overreacted to a private conversation. Said they were willing to forgive me if I used the money from the sale to purchase a new home that we can all live in. I stared at the screen, stunned, not a single sentence of real accountability, just veiled threats, guilt, and attempts to reclaim control. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Patricia Kramer, who had handled the closing. You did nothing wrong, she replied. They have no legal standing. I recommend zero contact, unless it's through an attorney. But the truth was, I didn't want silence forever. I wanted peace, and to get that, I needed understanding, context, maybe even closure. So I reached out to Megan Lancaster, a college friend I'd drifted from over the years, partly because my parents never approved of her unserious life. Emma Davis, she exclaimed when I called. It's been, what, 3 years? Something like that. Still trying to win gold stars from the world's most exhausting parents. I laughed. For the first time in weeks. Actually, I said, I stopped trying. We met for dinner, wine, pasta, candlelight, flickering over stainless steel cutlery. I told her everything. When I finished, Megan leaned back and whistled. That's simultaneously the most awful and most badass thing I've ever heard. I still feel like maybe I went too far, I admitted. Emma, they were planning to manipulate you out of your own house, that they were living in, for free, while you paid for their vacation. If anything, you were too nice. Her validation melted something hard and cold inside me. The next day, I scheduled my first appointment with Dr. Sarah Palmer, a trauma therapist, who specialized in enmeshment and family dynamics. We spoke for 90 minutes. When I left her office, I felt lighter, not healed, not even closed, but as if the map of my mind had been redrawn. She called what I'd experienced financial abuse, and for the first time, I had a name for the weight I'd carried. I managed to avoid my parents for 2 more months. Changed grocery stores, shifted my walking routes, and turned down local speaking engagements. But life has a way of circling back. One Tuesday afternoon, my former neighbor Rachel Chin called. Emma, I thought you should know. Your parents are outside your old house, sitting in their car, just staring at it. My heart pounded. They're not the owners anymore. Richard and Catherine are. I know, but the new owners are out of town. It's creepy. I thanked her and immediately called Richard Thompson, the executive who'd bought the house. He thanked me for the warning and contacted his security company. That night, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. Emma, my father's voice said coldly, we need to meet. Tomorrow, Maple Street Cafe. 10 a.m., if you don't show, we're coming to your office again. And this time, we won't leave quietly. I played the message twice, saved it, sent it to Patricia. You don't have to meet them, she said. We can file a restraining order. But I knew I had to face them. Not for their sake, for mine. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe at 10:15 a.m. late enough to make a point. Not so late they'd leave. I spotted them. Instantly, my mother's perfectly curled hair was now limp. My father's jaw was set in a hard, familiar clench. I approached in a navy blazer and heels. My armor, Robert, Diana, I said, deliberately using their first names. My mother flinched. My father's face darkened. Sit down, he snapped. I'm not here to take orders, I replied evenly. This conversation happens on equal terms. Or not at all. I sat down. Pulled out my phone, placed it on the table. Is that necessary? My mother asked. Given our history, yes. And with that, the real confrontation began. But that is for the next part. I sat down across from them and placed my phone on the table. I didn't bother hiding it. Is that necessary? My mother asked, voice pitched in that familiar tone of wounded fragility. Given our history, I said evenly, yes. I record all important business meetings now. We're your parents. Not a business meeting, my father snapped, and yet you threatened to show up at my office if I didn't agree to meet. That's not parenting, Robert. That's coercion. He wasn't used to me using his first name, and the flush in his face proved it. They both stared at me like I was some unfamiliar species. What you did, my father finally said, was unforgivable. You stole our home. It was never your home, I replied. It was my home. I generously let you live there. And you considered that generosity a burden. My mother frowned, confused. What are you talking about? I tapped my phone screen and pressed play. From the speaker, their voices spilled into the space between us. Clear and damning. She's been a burden from the start. All those years of expenses, college, everything. And now she has this valuable property just dropped in her lap, and she thinks she deserves it. What has she ever done? I stopped the recording. The cafe's chatter hushed. My mother had gone pale. My father clenched his fists. You recorded us, he hissed. That's illegal. It's not illegal to record a conversation I was part of, I said. You called me and failed to hang up. Your mistake. That was private, my mother said softly, tears forming. You misinterpreted. Don't, I said sharply. Don't insult my intelligence. You said what you meant, and then you spent the money Grandma left you on a car, instead of housing, and you just what? Sold our home. Left us homeless, my father demanded. No, I sold my home, I corrected, because I finally realized it would never belong to me emotionally as long as you were inside it. You're not homeless, you had money. You chose to use it foolishly. His voice dropped to a low, threatening hiss. We could sue you for this. We lived there for years. We have rights. I stayed calm. You contributed nothing, paid no rent. The deed was in my name. I consulted with an attorney before taking action. If you want to throw your last remaining funds into a lawsuit, you'll lose. Be my guest. My mother started to cry, not real tears, not grief, not guilt, just control. What do you want from us, Emma? She sniffled an apology. Yes, I said. But not that empty kind you always give. I want accountability. I want acknowledgement that for years, you treated me like an investment, something that had to pay off for your sacrifice. I want you to understand that love doesn't mean control. And I want boundaries. My father stiffened. What kind of boundaries? I will not support you financially. I will not share my address. I will contact you only when I choose. And if you show up uninvited or harass me or anyone I work with, I will pursue legal action. You're just cutting us off, my mother whispered. After everything you've done to me? I asked. Yes, unless and until you show true remorse. This is where we stand. My father's voice exploded. You ungrateful little Robert. My mother grabbed his arm, trying to contain the outburst. Around us, patrons stared. The barista behind the counter froze. You think you're better than us now, he spat. With your career, your degrees, your fancy little apartment. You know what, I said, calmly standing. You're right. I wouldn't be who I am today without you. Every time you made me feel small. Every time you used money to control me. Every conditional I love you. It showed me exactly who I didn't want to become. So thank you. I slung my purse over my shoulder, collected my phone, and took a breath. I paid for 6 months of storage for your things. The information was sent to your hotel in Paris. I can text it to you again, if needed. My mother's face crumpled. That's all you have to say to us. I looked at them, not as parents, or abusers, or enemies, but as two very broken people who never figured out how to love without strings attached. I hope you find peace, I said. I do, but I won't be your collateral damage anymore. And I walked away. Outside, the cold autumn air filled my lungs. The sky was gray but open. I felt taller, lighter. Like I had finally stopped dragging a rusted anchor behind me. Not revenge, not justice, just peace. 6 months later, I was settled into my new townhouse in Richmond. I'd transferred to our branch office here, started over, and slowly built a new rhythm. It wasn't instant healing. I still had therapy sessions with Dr. Palmer, but the work was shifting from survival to growth. You said something last time, she noted during a session, That you still feel guilty. Why? I hesitated. Sometimes, I wonder. Should I have confronted them first? Given them a chance to explain. And what would they have said? They would have denied it, or blamed stress, or guilt-tripped me. Dr. Palmer nodded. Would that have changed the truth of what you heard? No, I whispered. It would have just allowed them to do it again. That's right, she said. What you experienced, Emma, was financial abuse. It's subtle, but powerful. And the appropriate response to abuse is protection. No permission. Her words hit like a final hammer breaking through the last piece of guilt. I started researching financial abuse in families. How common it was, how few resources existed to help victims see the manipulation for what it was. And then, an idea. I pitched it to my boss, Vanessa. I want to create a workshop, I said. For first-time homebuyers, especially women, about recognizing financial manipulation and standing up for themselves. She listened closely. This could be a huge value add, educational, empowering, and completely aligned with what we stand for. With her support, I launched the workshop, Building Foundations, Financial Autonomy in Major Life Decisions. The first session had 30 attendees, then 50, then a waitlist. People shared stories, partners who controlled their finances, parents who guilt-tripped them into loans, siblings who used inheritance as leverage. Each story echoed mine. And each time, I offered them the one thing I hadn't had when it started: clarity. 3 workshops in. A local women's magazine ran a story about the initiative. Financial freedom. Emma Davis's fight against hidden manipulation. It caught the attention of Aunt Judith, my grandmother's sister. I saw the article. She said when we met for lunch, "Your grandmother would be proud." She never told me much, I admitted. She just left me the house. Judith sipped her tea. Because she knew. Robert was always like that. Entitled. Spoiled. She didn't want her home turning into another reward for his behavior. I nodded slowly. It made sense now. All of it. She saw something in you, Judith said gently. Resilience, independence. That's why you were her choice. 1 year to the day after I sold my grandmother's house, I visited her grave. I brought pink peonies, her favorite hand, sat in the grass beside her. I understand now, I said softly. You weren't just leaving me a house. You were leaving me a message. That I was worth something. That I didn't need to keep proving myself to people who would never see me. I stayed for an hour, watching the sky shift, letting the silence say the rest. That night, I met friends, my chosen family, for dinner. The ones who never asked me to shrink, or twist, or bleed, to earn their affection. We laughed, shared wine, celebrated a year of healing, and as I raised my glass, I remembered the note I had left on the granite counter in the house. Surprise, a burden did this. At the time, I meant it bitterly. Now, I understood. Sometimes the burden isn't who we are, but who we've been forced to be, and laying it down. That's where the freedom begins. 6 months after launching the workshop, my inbox became a floodplain. Survivors, professionals, lawyers, therapists, they all wanted to talk. 1 email caught my eye. Subject: Invitation to Keynote. National Women in Finance Summit. They wanted me to speak. I blinked twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The email was from the executive director of the summit, a national organization that advocated for women's financial education and protection. They'd read the Women's Monthly profile and wanted to feature my journey and workshop as a keynote. For a moment, panic flared. Imposter syndrome, old and familiar, slithered through me. Who was I to stand on a stage and talk about abuse, about family? But then I thought about the woman who stood in a coffee shop and faced the 2 people who had shaped her with silence, guilt, and need. That woman me had already earned the right to speak, so I accepted. 2 months later, I stood backstage at a hotel in Chicago, microphone pinned to my blazer, staring at the sea of chairs filling up. Hundreds of women, financial professionals, and advocates took their seats. I closed my eyes and breathed. This wasn't about shame, this was the truth. When they introduced me, I walked to the podium without shaking, and I began. My name is Emma Davis. A year ago, I sold my family home. It was the last gift from the only person who ever truly saw me, my grandmother. I sold it not for profit, not for escape, but because I overheard a conversation that shattered the foundation of my entire life. My parents, who had lived in my home rent-free, who used my income to travel, who had never once acknowledged their dependency, referred to me as a burden. That moment woke me up. And it started a journey I never expected, one of financial clarity, emotional boundaries, and ultimately freedom. I told them everything: the house, the voicemail, the confrontation, the letter, and the shift that happened when I realized that love weaponized is not love at all. There were tears, nods, audible exhales. By the time I finished, the entire room stood a standing ovation, not for a perfect life, but for an honest one. After the speech, I was swarmed. Women with stories like mine. Attorneys who wanted to help expand the workshop. A non-profit that offered grant funding. Then came CBS Mornings. Then, a feature in Forbes Women. The workshop became a national template. Other real estate offices adopted it. Therapists began incorporating the framework into financial abuse recovery. My inbox turned into a community, and through all of it, I kept the promise I made to myself. No contact, no guilt, no returning to the old dynamic. My parents sent one final certified letter after the media attention began, vaguely threatening defamation lawsuits. My attorney, Patricia, drafted a polite but devastatingly airtight response. That shut it down instantly. They never contacted me again. A year and a half after the sale, I returned to the storage unit. I hadn't touched the items since the day I packed them. The air inside was stale. Dust clung to the boxes, but I was ready. I opened the one marked photos, parents. Inside. The same pictures I'd seen 100 times, vacations, birthday parties, school awards, so many smiling faces. None of them are real anymore. One photo caught my attention, me as a toddler, asleep on my grandmother's chest on the couch. Her arms were wrapped around me protectively. Her eyes, closed, peaceful. I kept that one. Everything else I donated. The furniture, gone. The silverware they fought over like it was gold. Donated. The letters. Shredded, unread. It was time to clear space for new memories. The financial abuse curriculum I built expanded into schools, then into workplace seminars, then into a podcast called Conditional Love. Within 3 months, it ranked top 25 in its category. I was invited to speak to college students, to therapists in training, to women's shelters. I became a voice. Not because I asked for it, because I survived it. One day, Megan and I were sitting on my new porch, sharing wine, watching fireflies. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked quietly. "I miss the idea of them," I admitted. "I grieved the parents I thought I had. But I don't miss the real ones. Not anymore." She nodded. "I'm proud of you, you know, for not just surviving but turning it into something." I looked around my space, the porch swing I'd picked out, the terracotta planters I'd painted myself, the faint smell of lavender from my garden. My grandmother once wrote, "Use it as a foundation, not a crutch." I think I finally understand what she meant. On what would have been my grandmother's 89th birthday, I planted a magnolia tree in my backyard. The same kind she'd planted outside the house I left behind. I invited friends, colleagues, workshop, graduates. We had cake. We shared stories. One woman came up to me afterward. "You changed my life," she said, voice cracking. "I was going to sign my house over to my brother, because he said it's what good daughters do. And now," I asked. I told him no. "And I don't even feel guilty." I smiled. "Then you just broke the cycle." As I watched the magnolia sway in the warm breeze, I remembered standing in my empty childhood kitchen. The note I left: surprise. A burden did this. At the time, it was a middle finger to everything they tried to make me feel. Now it meant something else. A burden didn't just destroy their illusions. She rebuilt something better. She planted new roots, and she grew. Months later, I received a card, no return address. Inside was a photo of a house for sale in aging colonial, and a handwritten note in careful script. *Emma, I saw this house and thought of you. It needs work. But so did you. Look at what you became. You are not a burden. You are a seed that bloomed in fire. A friend of your grandmother. I smiled, folded the note, and tucked it inside my journal. Not everything needs a perfect ending. Some stories just need truth. And that is the legacy I choose. Have you ever had to cut ties with someone who made love feel like a transaction? Have you ever carried the weight of someone else's expectations? Finally let it go. If Emma's story touched something inside you, I hope you'll share your own in the comments. Because healing begins with honesty and freedom. Sometimes it starts with one hard decision to choose yourself.